So a couple months ago, I had the really awesome opportunity of traveling out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming to shoot a multi-day destination wedding out there. And in this video, what I want to do is just walk you through the entire process of planning for, filming, and then delivering all the deliverables for that wedding. I've done a lot of videos on this channel talking about really specific things about the travel process, the filming process, the photography process, like what camera bag I use, what lenses I use, specific camera gear settings and all that. But what I want to do in this video is just back up and give you like a really big overarching macro perspective on what it actually looks like to plan for, execute, and then deliver a multi-day destination wedding. So the way that I've kind of built this video is in 3 specific chapters. So chapter 1 is going to be all about pre-production, planning for travel, planning for sessions, what gear I was planning to bring and why. Chapter 2 is going to be the actual production element, so actually traveling out there, how I approached the different sessions that I shot, and all that kind of stuff. And then chapter 3 is going to be the post-production side of things, where I talk about how I actually took all those pieces that I shot and put them together into deliverables for the client. Now, before we dive into all those chapters, I do want to talk about how I actually got this wedding, because I think for any of you who actually film weddings and photograph weddings, it's really interesting to hear, like, how did someone actually book this like multi-day destination wedding? And in this case, the referral actually came from the photography team, Eastland and Joshua, some friends of mine from Ohio. I actually met them at a workshop like 7 years ago. We've been talking about shooting a wedding together really ever since then, and just the stars have never aligned for us in that. But they ended up booking this couple for the photography aspect and then referred them to me on the video side, and that's how this all came together. So the first component of pre-production is just session planning. What actual sessions are you going to be responsible for filming over the course of the time that you're there? And for me, there was specifically 3 of them. Number 1 is obviously the wedding day itself. That was on a Saturday, and so I knew obviously for the entire wedding day, I'm going to be out just filming the wedding itself. But there were 2 additional sessions. Both of those happened on a Friday. So on Friday morning, we booked what is called a storytelling session. And for these sessions, I just go out into a beautiful location, in this case, Grand Teton National Park, with the couple, found a really beautiful aesthetic location, and just captured some additional B-roll content that I could use to kind of supplement the footage of their wedding film, add some additional content over their story as they kind of walk through that whole narration, and just allow me to kind of make this entire film feel more like a documentary, because I was filming it over the course of multiple days. During the storytelling session, I also mic'd up both the bride and the groom, and then just asked them some leading questions, had them have some conversations with each other back and forth, so I could use those audio snippets in the wedding film just to add some additional audio components in addition to all the video B-roll content that I was capturing as well. So that took place on Friday morning, and then Friday evening I had a interview session scheduled with them where we went back to their cabins and I filmed a whole interview with them, talking to the story of their relationship, how they met each other, fell in love, all the audio components that are going to become a really key component of my wedding film. And this is one of the things I do on most wedding films that I book, is make sure to have a sit-down interview with the couple so I can really dive into their story and really personalize the film. But then I ended up adding on another session that I did with them. Eastland and Joshua, the photographers, had booked a family session with them on Mormon Row in Grand Teton National Park on that Friday afternoon after our storytelling session, but before that narrative recording in the evening. And so I decided to show up for that because, number 1, it's in Mormon Row and it's beautiful. There were some beautiful landscape aesthetics that I could capture as well. And then I was able to shoot a bunch of footage of the bride and groom with their families and their friends just kind of hanging out, some fun, candid stuff of all that, capture some additional content of the couple as Eastland and Joshua were photographing them. And it just added some really awesome additional content that I could add into the wedding film. So those are the 4 major sessions that I was responsible for, basically taking place on a Friday and a Saturday. But then one of the things I was really intentional about for this job was creating some additional space to capture B-roll of the actual national park itself. Now, I don't do this for every wedding that I film, but with this specific wedding, Grand Teton National Park and the Jackson Hole area were of special significance to the couple. They were actually coming from Texas to Wyoming for this wedding, and so it was a destination wedding for them as well. Jackson Hole had a lot of significance in their relationship. They had been out there before and just really loved the location, and so I really wanted to make Grand Teton National Park an additional character in their wedding film, and I knew I could only do that if I had dedicated some specific time to actually capturing some video footage of the national park and some B-roll sequences and scenes within the park. And so I decided to fly out a day early, Thursday morning, just to have the rest of Thursday to capture whatever B-roll I was able to capture of the national park, some additional sounds, some wildlife, some landscapes, all that kind of stuff, just to add some additional B-roll landscape content into the film to really place the viewer in the scene of what was actually happening in this park, and just to take any stress off of me from having to film all that B-roll content on the wedding day itself or during the storytelling session. And honestly, I was able to be really intentional with the locations I went to and capture some really cool content at specific times of day as well. So once I've figured out what sessions I'm filming, then I have to turn my attention to what gear am I actually going to use to capture all of this. And that's where I started using an app called Milanote, which is an app that I've talked about before on this channel. But this is the app that I use for basically all of my mood boarding, all of my pre-production planning for any major shoots that I do. And Milanote's awesome just because it's a really kind of glorified note-taking app that I just use to kind of sketch out, here's all the different cameras I'm going to use, the different lenses I'm going to use, the different accessories I need with those, who's going to be operating which camera when and where. My friend Jordy was coming out to assist me for this, and so I was intentionally assigning cameras and lenses to him for certain parts of the day, just kind of basically getting my gear brain organized of which cameras, which lenses do I need. I ended up having to rent some stuff just to supplement the lenses that I already had because I didn't have enough stuff to capture everything. I was also experimenting with some time code units just to be able to sync up all the footage over the course of multiple days because I had multiple cameras going, multiple microphones and lavaliers and all that kind of stuff. So basically I just used Milanote to sketch out all the gear that I was going to be using, what I was going to be using it for, and that just really helped me get organized before I even opened up a bag to start putting the gear in. And then the final component of the pre-production stuff is just the actual travel itself. So obviously booking flights from my local airport in Grand Rapids to the Jackson Hole area. So flying in Thursday morning, flying back on Sunday morning. In terms of lodging and all that, I don't know if you've ever been out to the Jackson Hole area, but it is extremely expensive, especially lodging, but really everything is super expensive out there. And so I ended up booking an Airbnb in Victor, Idaho, which is I think like a 45-minute drive outside of Jackson Hole, just through the mountain pass. Doing that, I was able to get an entire Airbnb with multiple rooms, kitchen, bathroom, all that for I think the same cost of like one night in a hotel in Jackson Hole. So absolutely financially worth it to book an Airbnb kind of outside of the Jackson Hole area and then drive in. It did end up coming back to bite me, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, just with some stuff that happened that was totally out of my control. But that's what I did for flights and lodging. And then for the rental car, one of the things I always do when I book a rental car is I always make sure to get some sort of like SUV. Just allows me to spread out the gear, organize things a little bit easier, and honestly just have some like overhead protection too in case it's raining. I can still like prep gear and stuff in the trunk with the the tailgate open. That just helps a lot. So I always make sure to rent some sort of SUV, crossover, something like that. Costs just a little bit more than getting a sedan, but it's always worth it in my opinion. So that leads us on to the trip itself, and our wake-up call for the Thursday morning for the flight was ridiculously early. I think I got up at like 2:30 in the morning to make our flight, but basically got on the flight in Grand Rapids, landed in Jackson Hole mid-morning, which is really ideal because we were able to just grab the rental car, head into Jackson Hole and grab some lunch, went over to the grocery store and did what I typically do whenever I get into a new location and just buy a little cooler that I can just kind of fill up with some ice and some water and just a few food items. And then from there, we just took off driving and ended up driving through all of Grand Teton National Park and all the way up to Yellowstone National Park, which is multiple hours north of the Jackson area. But just kind of used that time in the afternoon just to scout a bunch of locations. The sun was super high, it was super, aggressive lighting. And so we didn't do a lot of filming in terms of B-roll content, but just kind of allowed us to figure out what locations do I actually want to film in once the light starts getting a little bit better. And then once we kind of made it all the way up to Yellowstone, started filming a few things on the way back. And by the time we got back to the Jackson area, the sun was kind of coming down. We were able to run into town and grab a quick dinner and then go back out and film a bunch of stuff at sunset, which was really, really ideal. And gotta say, filming sunset in the Tetons was just absolutely incredible. Got to film some really beautiful time lapses of the mountains, photographed some planes coming in because I knew I wanted to tell the story of travel. Because this couple was not from Jackson, they were coming in from Texas. I wanted to film some planes over the Tetons, and so got some really cool shots of the planes landing. We were able to film a lot of wildlife, film a lot of the mountains, and just the landscape and the beauty of the Grand Teton National Park area. And just having some dedicated time set aside to film all of this content was really, really huge because it just gave me the actual space to be intentional with what I was capturing, and the footage that I captured was absolutely beautiful. So after that, we drove back to our Airbnb, and this is where things got a little bit complicated because literally the week before we flew out to Jackson, the mountain pass that connected Jackson to Victor, which is where we were staying, that pass collapsed. And obviously this is a huge issue for all the locals. This really impacted the local community, but obviously it impacted us as well because we were traveling from Jackson to Victor, and that turned what should have been like a 45-minute to an hour drive into like a 3.5 hour drive. So after we finished filming all that landscape sunset stuff in the Tetons, then we had to jump in the car and literally drive 3.5 hours to our Airbnb, unload all the gear, charge all the batteries, all that stuff, get a few hours of sleep just to wake up the next morning, pack everything back up at the car, and drive 3.5 hours back for the storytelling session on Friday morning. So we were absolutely exhausted. The entire trip was really, really exhausting, but absolutely worth it. We drove back up for that storytelling session and just had some beautiful scenery in the Tetons that morning with the couple over by the river with the sun kind of rising, hitting the mountains. Got some really beautiful footage, captured some great audio there. It was just a really beautiful storytelling session in general. Then we drove back into town, grabbed some coffee with Eastland and Joshua, and basically just hung out in the town, did some worked from the little cafe for a few hours until that family session later that night. Initially, we had intended to drive back to our Airbnb and just kind of take a nap, but with it being literally like a 3-hour drive each way, it was just like, it's gonna be 6 hours of driving to maybe get like a 2-hour nap. Let's just stay at the cafe, buy some extra coffee, and just kind of power through it, and that's what we did. So after we worked at the cafe for a few hours, then it was time for that family session, and so we went out and joined Eastland and Joshua at Mormon Row to capture all of the family as they were doing their family photos. Had a absolutely stunning sunset over the mountains, was able to capture some more B-roll of some wildlife. Just the sun coming through the mountains at sunset, it's just something you have to see it to be able to believe how beautiful it is. The video really doesn't do justice how absolutely stunning it was. So captured all of that and then drove up to the cabin where I did the entire interview process with the couple. From there, you guessed it, we had to turn back around, drive 3.5 hours back to the Airbnb, load all the footage, recharge all the batteries, try to get a few hours of sleep ourselves just to wake up the next morning, pack everything back up into the car, and then drive 3.5 hours back for the wedding day. By that point, we were honestly really exhausted, so I just decided to cancel our last day of the Airbnb, and I just bit the bullet and just booked a hotel room close to the wedding venue so that after we filmed the wedding for the entirety of that day, we could just crash in the hotel, pack up all of our stuff, and then catch a few hours of sleep before we had to jump on our flight Sunday morning. But before we get there, the wedding day itself was just absolutely stunning. The venue was Diamond Cross Ranch, and just a stunning venue just outside the national park, but you can still see all the mountains. Diamond Cross has a whole bunch of horses that they intentionally time out to run behind the couple during the first kiss and the pronouncement and all that. And so it was just a really fun wedding to film. It was super windy, which posed a few challenges with some audio stuff, but just a really fun morning of getting ready, capturing some fun footage with the couple. Obviously the ceremony itself, a little bit smaller wedding, a little bit more intimate, intentional wedding, which I really, really love. And then Diamond Cross was awesome enough to actually bring the horses out for us so we could film a bunch of footage with the couple and the horses around sunset. We ended up not getting the sunset for the time with the horses, and then after we had kind of finished with the horses, we went back into the reception hall. Then the sun just like broke through the clouds. We had one of the most stunning sunsets I have ever seen, just kind of like peeked through the mountains under the cloud layer. It was actually kind of fun because we ended up racing out and the couple was actually standing there like drinking their drinks, watching the sunset, and we were able to get some really beautiful footage of them just literally candidly watching the sunset. That photo that Eastland and Josh took actually turned into the thumbnail of my video because it was just so insanely stunning and honestly just a really, really beautiful way to end the day. From there, like I said, we headed to the hotel room that I had booked, packed all the gear up, dumped all the footage, and then got up the next morning, drove back to the Jackson Hole airport, jumped on a plane, and flew home. So now that the wedding is all completed, all the footage is gathered, I have like 600 gigs worth of footage from this wedding. Then I turned to the post-production side of things and actually putting together the deliverables for the wedding day. For this wedding, there were 3 sets of deliverables that I was responsible for: the full wedding film itself, the teaser film, and a bunch of different short form reels that I delivered to all the vendors. So working in reverse, the first thing that I delivered was all these vendor reels, and I did this within the first week. And this is something I've been doing as a wedding videographer that I think really helps just connect myself to the other wedding vendors. I made 2 specific highlight reels from the wedding day itself that were more cinematic, just kind of showed the entirety of the day, sent that to all the vendors so they could just post those reels and use that as a cool highlight. But then I also created additional reels that were specifically targeted aesthetically, auditorially, the content that I used for the bartenders, the photographers, Eastland and Josh, The florist, for the bar reel, I only showed shots of like the actual drinks that the bartenders were making, shots of the bartenders, of their cool like truck that they had brought, of the actual bar inside the reception hall, those kind of things. The reel for the photographer was all of them in action, actually interacting with the client, interacting with the guests, actually using their cameras, just some behind the scenes content that they could post and would be useful for them that they couldn't have captured otherwise. I also did the same thing for the florist, and all of these I had chosen songs that specifically matched the kind of style and personality of those vendors. So those 6 reels I delivered within the first week, and then I turned my attention to the teaser film. So with the teaser film, my goal is always to just kind of try to give an encapsulation of the weekend itself, grab some intentional audio snippets that just kind of pique people's interest in the film without giving away the entire story. I'm not trying to create a whole narrative here. This is just like a movie highlight, just to kind of pique interest, get people excited, but also show off some big points of the day.
I wanted a really small, intimate wedding. I think we both did, and every person here means the world to us, and I just feel like it's going to be a really, really special day.
With this teaser film, I really wanted to show off some personality of the couples, some of the reason that they had a little bit more intimate wedding, the reason that they had a multi-day wedding where they had their friends and family join them for multiple days over the weekend. I really wanted to show off the location in Jackson Hole, Grand Teton National Park, Diamond Cross Ranch, because I knew all 3 of those things were very significant to the couple, and I wanted to show off just some fun moments of the day. So that teaser film came together really beautifully. I delivered that within 2 weeks, and then I turned my attention to the entire narrative film. Like with most wedding films that I create, this film was built around the actual story narration that I had filmed with the couple on that Friday night after the family session, where I sat down, asked them questions about their story, how they fell in love, the course of their relationship. That became kind of the audio bed for the day. And then I also grabbed audio snippets from the vows, from the dad's speech, the sister's maid of honor speech, some audio snippets from the storytelling session, and then obviously footage from the entire weekend to basically craft a film that showcased the experience they had over the course of the weekend, the location, the significant people who were there on the wedding day itself, some specific audio moments from those people, and just try to craft a film that would just bring the couple back to the wedding day, the experience that they had, and just allow them to relive that entire experience every single time they watch the film. And it's kind of crazy building this film because, like I said, I had like 600 gigs worth of footage, but because I had done so much work on the pre-production end, because I knew exactly what I was going to be filming, when I was going to be filming it, the goals that I had specifically for targeting each filmmaking session, I was able to be a lot more intentional with those sessions so that the footage I captured could more easily be integrated into the film, and I didn't have a lot of superfluous footage that I just didn't need. Most of the footage that I captured was footage I was actually intentionally shooting because I knew that I was going to slot it into the film in a certain way. So all that being said, do not skimp out on pre-production. It is such a huge piece of the wedding filmmaking process. Make sure to spend your time so that you can be intentional with the shots that you take, so that you can mentally check off things as you accomplish and film those, and just be intentional about planning for what the vision for the film is going to be like before you ever pick up a camera and start recording. It turns the film into a much more meaningful overall deliverable for both yourself and for the couple. So anyway, that is my trip out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It was a really, really beautiful, fun trip. I will link the full wedding film and the teaser film down below in case you'd like to check those out. And if you have any questions about the trip, the pre-production process, any of that kind of stuff, feel free to leave those questions down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.